The 6 silent dangers Carl Jung warns you to avoid. Carl Jung didn't just guide people to become whole, he warned them about what could shatter them. You might be doing everything right, meditating, journaling, doing the inner work, and still feel like something invisible is blocking your growth. That something might be one of the silent dangers Jung spent his life trying to expose. These aren't loud or obvious. You won't find them on a motivational poster or trending in your algorithm. They're quiet, subtle, embedded in your personality, your habits, your beliefs. And because they live in the unconscious, they grow unchecked until one day you're stuck, lost, or worse, convinced you're evolving when you're actually regressing. So today, we're going to explore 6 silent psychological dangers that Carl Jung warned us to avoid. These aren't random theories, they're recurring patterns Jung saw in thousands of people over decades of research and practice. You'll learn how the persona social mask can become a trap instead of a tool. You'll see how projection distorts your reality and poisons your relationships. You'll understand why spiritual growth, when misused, inflates the ego instead of dissolving it. You'll uncover the hidden influence of the anima and animus within you and what happens when they're ignored. You'll discover how resisting individuation keeps you stuck in immature patterns. And finally, you'll face the greatest threat of all, forgetting that the unconscious exists at all. But first, why should you care? Because these dangers don't just block your growth. They shape your suffering. They silently steer your decisions, damage your potential, and make healing feel impossible. But the good news? Once you see them, you can change everything. Jung believed that making the unconscious conscious was the foundation of all transformation, and that's exactly what we're about to do. This isn't a feel-good video, it's a wake-up call. Because if you're serious about becoming whole, about integrating your shadow and reclaiming yourself, then you need to know what's secretly working against you. Let's dive into the first danger Carl Jung warns us to avoid, and why it may already be running your life. Most people don't notice these dangers until it's too late. The signs are subtle, prolonged anxiety, failed relationships, cycles that keep repeating, creative blocks that won't lift. These are the red flags that something deeper is at play, something inside you that you haven't yet met. This is where Jung's wisdom becomes more than theory, it becomes a mirror. These 6 dangers aren't. The first danger Carl Jung warns us about is the trap of identifying with the persona. The persona is the mask you wear to survive in society. It's the version of you that smiles at the office, follows the rules, and says the right thing at dinner. It's not fake, it's functional. We need it to navigate the world. But when the mask becomes the face, we lose touch with who we really are. Jung wrote that, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. That's the problem. You start to believe you are the persona. The curated version of yourself takes over, and the deeper parts of your psyche get buried. You become the job title, the relationship role, the image on your social feed. And the more successful your persona becomes, the harder it is to admit that something feels hollow underneath. At first, it's subtle. You feel a low-level disconnection. You notice yourself acting out of obligation rather than authenticity. You say things you don't mean. You agree to things that make you tired. You perform. Then the emptiness sets in. You start to feel like you're living someone else's life. Your dreams feel distant. Your joy feels muted. And the worst part? You can't even name what's wrong because the persona is still smiling, still functioning, still earning praise. This is why identifying with the persona is so dangerous. It's a silent identity theft. It steals your vitality and replaces it with a role. And because it's socially rewarded, you don't notice you're bleeding out internally. Jung believed that healing begins when we consciously differentiate from the persona. That doesn't mean rejecting it, but realizing it's just one layer of your psyche, not the whole self. To do this, you have to listen to what the persona tries to suppress, the emotions that don't match the role, the dreams that don't fit the narrative, the thoughts that feel too raw to say out loud, because behind that mask is your truth. And your real life starts the moment you're brave enough to take it off. Next, we'll explore a danger that often follows closely behind the persona, the danger of projection and how it makes your shadow someone else's problem. Think about it. How often do you act in a way that aligns with how you feel versus how you think you should act? The persona thrives on shoulds. You should be polite. You should be strong. You should be successful. These messages become internal laws, and breaking them feels dangerous when it's your soul asking for freedom. This danger is especially silent in high achievers. The more praise you receive for the persona, the more pressure you feel to maintain it. Vulnerability becomes a threat. Admitting uncertainty feels like failure. So you double down. You keep smiling. You keep producing. And meanwhile, the real you, the one who cries, questions, dreams, goes quiet. Over time, the cost becomes emotional exhaustion. Burnout, disconnection from your own desires, relationships built on performance instead of presence, and eventually, a crisis because the psyche won't tolerate disconnection forever. It will rebel. Through depression, anxiety, midlife breakdowns, anything to get your attention. Jung saw this time and time again. His patients weren't broken. They were. The second danger Carl Jung warned about is projection of the most powerful and most invisible psychological traps. Projection happens when we take aspects of our unconscious self, especially the ones we don't like, and see them in other people. That coworker who always needs attention, maybe it's your own unmet need to be seen. That friend who's so judgmental, maybe it's your disowned inner critic speaking through them. Jung believed that projection is how the unconscious reveals itself. What you react to emotionally in others is often a mirror, not a window. And the more extreme your reaction, the more personal the reflection. Here's why it's dangerous. Projection destroys your relationships. It turns friends into enemies, strangers into threats, and loved ones into symbols of your unresolved pain. You're no longer interacting with them, you're battling your own shadow in disguise. And because projection is unconscious, it feels true. You're convinced it's them. You don't realize you're seeing your own disowned parts through their face. This is why Jung emphasized shadow work. The shadow isn't evil, it's simply what you've hidden or rejected. Traits that didn't fit your persona, anger, desire, envy, ambition. All of it goes underground, but it doesn't disappear. It finds ways to express itself through projection. When you don't own your shadow, it owns you. And the more spiritual or self-aware you think you are, the more dangerous projection becomes, because now your judgments feel morally justified. You convince yourself you're evolved, while projecting even harder. So how do you stop projecting? You start by slowing down your reactions. When someone triggers you, ask, what part of me is being reflected here? Journal it. Sit with the discomfort. You may discover buried beliefs, emotions you never voiced, or unmet needs you've ignored for years. The more shadow you integrate, the less you need to project. You start seeing people more clearly, with compassion, with boundaries, with depth. And that clarity is power, because when your shadow is no longer the enemy, other people no longer feel like threats. They become teachers, mirrors, guides. Up next, a danger that often hides in spiritual circles, the seductive trap of spiritual inflation. Let's take an example. Imagine you constantly criticize people for being lazy. You can't stand it. But if you dig deeper, maybe you grew up in a home where rest was shamed. Maybe part of you craves slowing down, but your persona won't allow it. So instead of owning your exhaustion, you project it by attacking others who allow themselves what you secretly desire. Or take someone who despises arrogance in others. They may be disowning their own confidence, their desire to be seen, because they were taught it's selfish. So their shadow comes out sideways, judging those who embody the very traits they suppress. This is how projection silently hijacks your emotional world. It turns internal conflict into external drama. What's worse, projection often escalates. You begin to collect evidence. Every comment, every glance, every action from that person confirms your story. But it's not their behavior, it's your lens. Jung called this psychic contamination. The shadow distorts your vision until reality bends around your wounds. And it doesn't stop with individuals. People project onto groups, ideologies, religions, even entire communities. Projection can fuel hatred, extremism, even war. That's why reclaiming your shadow isn't Danger number 3 is one of the most seductive and most misunderstood pitfalls on the path: spiritual inflation. Carl Jung coined this term to describe what happens when the ego identifies with the self, the higher, deeper intelligence within us. It's when spiritual insight inflates the ego instead of dissolving it. And it's everywhere. You meditate, read ancient texts, feel a rush of bliss or clarity, and suddenly, without realizing it, you think you're above your wounds, above others, above the messiness of being human. Spiritual inflation whispers, you've transcended that. It masks itself as wisdom, but it's often just ego in disguise. You start to feel special, chosen, spiritually superior, and from the outside, it can look like confidence, but inside, it's hollow. It's a bypass. Here's how it works. Instead of integrating your shadow, you deny it. Instead of owning your flaws, you spiritualize them. Anger becomes low vibration. Grief becomes a block. Pain becomes bad energy. So you avoid, suppress, and polish your persona with spiritual language. Jung warned that this is not evolution, it's regression dressed in robes. And it's dangerous, because it isolates you. If you're spiritually inflated, no one can challenge you. Feedback feels like an attack. You attract followers, not friends, performers, not partners. You lose intimacy, vulnerability, connection. Even worse, spiritual inflation creates inner pressure. You feel you have to maintain your awakened image. That pressure can lead to anxiety, secrecy, even breakdowns. You're so invested in the role that you forget how to be real. But here's the truth. Real spiritual growth makes you more human, not less. More grounded, more humble, more open, not more aloof, detached, or superior. The antidote to spiritual inflation is integration. You bring your insight down into your body, your behavior, your relationships. You measure your growth not by how often you feel enlightened, but by how honestly you show up when life gets messy. Jung believed that the more spiritual power you access, the more shadow you must integrate. Otherwise, that power will turn against you. It will distort your perception, damage your relationships, and inflate your ego until it pops. So, if you ever find yourself thinking you've arrived, pause. Ask, where might I be avoiding my humanity? Because the self doesn't want a perfect image, it wants a whole human. Next, we'll dive into a more internal danger, the neglect of your inner feminine or masculine energies, and how it fragments your psyche. Consider someone who has just completed a spiritual retreat. Their return filled with insight, but instead of using that insight to deepen relationships or ground themselves, they begin correcting others, subtly or not so subtly, judging those who aren't awake. They stop listening. They start preaching. They build an identity around being evolved. This is the inflation Jung warned about. The ego, instead of dissolving in the presence of the self, merges with it. It says, I am enlightened, but that I is still the same ego, just wearing a divine mask. Spiritual inflation can also manifest as avoidance. You say, everything happens for a reason, but never grieve your losses. You say, I've forgiven them, but never feel your anger. You say, it's all love, but never set boundaries. These phrases can be true, but when used to bypass pain, they become spiritualized denial. Jung believed that awakening should not inflate youth. The fourth silent danger Jung warned about is the repression of the anima, or animus, inner feminine, or inner masculine. In Jungian psychology, every man has an animath, inner feminine energy, and every woman has an animus, the inner masculine. These aren't gender stereotypes. They're archetypal energies that exist in every psyche, regardless of biological sex or identity. The anima connects us to intuition, emotion, creativity, and receptivity. The animus connects us to logic, structure, action, and assertiveness. When these inner figures are balanced, we feel whole. But when they're repressed or distorted, they sabotage us from within. For men, repressing the anima can lead to emotional numbness, difficulty with intimacy, or an overemphasis on logic and control. The man becomes disconnected from his own feelings, trapped in the persona of strength, afraid to feel vulnerable. For women, repressing the animus can lead to passivity, indecision, or a fear of authority and assertiveness. The woman may silence her voice, doubt her ideas, or struggle to set boundaries. These imbalances aren't just personal, they're cultural. Patriarchal systems often reward men for cutting off their feminine side and pressure women to suppress their inner authority. But the cost is psychological fragmentation. Jung believed that to individuate, to become whole, you must integrate your inner opposite. That means a man must listen to his anima. Not just in theory, but in real life, honoring his feelings, cultivating empathy, trusting intuition, and a woman must engage her animus, speaking her truth, setting goals, taking action. When these energies are unintegrated, they show up in distorted ways. A man may project his anima onto a partner, expecting her to carry all the emotion and beauty he's disconnected from. A woman may project her animus onto men in power, feeling both drawn to and threatened by them, without realizing it's her own inner power she's resisting. Integration begins with awareness. Start by noticing which energy feels uncomfortable. What parts of you do you dismiss as too much or not enough? That's where your work lies. Because when the anima and animus are honored, your psyche starts to balance. You become less reactive, more creative, more grounded. You stop outsourcing your power or emotions and begin owning them. Up next, a danger that's less flashy but just as destructive: the resistance to individuation. Imagine a man who feels disconnected from his children. He provides, protects, solves problems but struggles to express affection. He watches his partner bond emotionally and wonders why he feels distant. He might be successful in the world, but inside, there's a silence he can't explain. That's the repressed anima. Or picture a woman who constantly downplays her intelligence in meetings. She avoids conflict, second-guesses her ideas, and apologizes before speaking. She may feel creative and compassionate, but without her animus, she doubts her own direction. She waits for permission that only she can give. These patterns don't just limit us, they hurt us. They create internal power struggles. They show up in our relationships as overdependence, resentment, emotional explosions, or complete withdrawal. The anima and animus, when repressed, don't disappear. They go underground and become distorted. A man may become overly sentimental, passive, or manipulative. A woman may become overly controlling, rigid, or emotionally cold. These extremes are cries for integration. Jung believed that dreams often reveal our inner opposite. Men may dream. The fifth silent danger Carl Jung warned about is the resistance to individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, not who society told you to be, not who your family expects, but who your soul is here to become. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming real, whole, integrated. Jung believed that this was the ultimate task of the human journey, but most people resist it. Why? Because it threatens everything the ego has built. Individuation requires you to confront your conditioning, to question your beliefs, to disappoint people, to step away from the tribe. It demands solitude, honesty, shadow work. And all of that is terrifying, especially in a world that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. The resistance usually doesn't scream, it whispers. You don't have time for that. You're not ready. This is just a phase. It disguises itself as logic, as practicality, as fear of failure. But what it's really protecting is the fragile ego that doesn't want to change. Jung said that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. That's what happens when individuation is denied. Generational patterns repeat, dreams die, the soul suffocates. Resisting individuation leads to a life of quiet desperation. On the surface, everything looks fine, but underneath, there's a restlessness, a knowing that something is off, that you're meant for more, not in a grandiose way, but in a deeply personal one. Individuation isn't glamorous. It's not always spiritual. Sometimes it looks like quitting the job, ending the relationship, going to therapy, changing your name, or simply telling the truth for the first time. It's messy, but it's real. And the price of resisting it is high. Depression, addiction, anxiety, a chronic sense of being lost, because the psyche will keep pushing you toward your truth even if it has to scream. The good news? Once you begin, everything starts to shift. You gain energy, insight, a sense of alignment that no achievement can match. You stop living for approval and start living from purpose. That's individuation. And resisting it may be the most dangerous trap of all because it feels so normal. Up next, we face the sixth and final danger, the most silent of them all, the neglect of the unconscious mind. Take someone who's followed all the rules: career, marriage, success, but feels an emptiness that success can't fill. That's a soul calling for individuation. Or someone who keeps sabotaging relationships because they're scared to be seen beyond their persona. That's not failure, it's a sign that something deeper is asking to emerge. Often, individuation starts with crisis. A job loss, a breakup, a health scare. These moments break the illusion of control and force you to listen. They're invitations, not punishments. Jung believed that symptoms are messengers from the soul. When life breaks down, it's not the end, it's the threshold. Many resist individuation because it lacks a clear roadmap. It doesn't guarantee results. It asks you to follow intuition, dreams, synchronicities, and that's uncomfortable for a mind trained to seek control. But individuation isn't about control. It's about surrendering to your own becoming. This path also demands responsibility. You can no longer blame your parents, society, or your past. You begin to own your projections, your choices, your inner world. That kind of radical accountability is. The sixth and final danger Jung warned about is perhaps the most insidious: neglecting the unconscious. Most people think of the unconscious as a distant, abstract, thingsome, mysterious force that psychologists deal with. But for Jung, the unconscious wasn't just a part of the mind. It was the foundation of the psyche, and ignoring it is like ignoring the soil your entire life grows from. The unconscious is everything you don't know about yourself. Your memories, instincts, repressed feelings, inherited patterns, forgotten traumas. It holds your shadow but also your creativity, intuition, and deepest truths. When you ignore it, you don't just miss out on potential, you set yourself up for sabotage. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's how people get stuck in toxic relationships, repeat the same mistakes, or feel like they're being haunted by something they can't name. That something is often the unconscious screaming to be seen. Neglecting the unconscious shows up in different ways. You might dismiss your dreams, avoid silence, distract yourself with constant busyness, suppress emotions that don't fit, stay stuck in loops without understanding why. These are all signs that the unconscious is being ignored. And it doesn't go away, it just gets louder. Through anxiety, depression, sudden outbursts, self-sabotage, addictions. The psyche will do anything to get your attention, even if it looks like a breakdown. Jung believed that symptoms were not enemies, but signals. Messages from the unconscious that something in your system is out of alignment. And healing begins the moment you stop fighting those symptoms and start listening to them. So how do you work with the unconscious? Start by paying attention. Your dreams, your triggers, your fantasies, your slips of the tongue, they all reveal unconscious material. Journal, meditate, create, sit in silence. Let the psyche speak. It always will, if you're willing to listen. Therapy, shadow work, and active imagination are also powerful tools. But the most important ingredient is humility. You must admit that you don't fully know yourself and commit to finding out. When you honor the unconscious, life begins to change. You start making choices that feel aligned. You stop repeating cycles. You feel a sense of inner guidance that doesn't come from logic, it comes from wholeness. Next, we'll tie all 6 dangers together and reflect on how Jung's wisdom can help you live a more integrated, conscious life. Imagine someone who feels stuck in a job they hate, a relationship that drains them, or a lifestyle that no longer fits. They tell themselves they're fine, that it could be worse. But deep inside, there's unrest. A voice they've ignored for years starts getting louder. That's the unconscious trying to speak. Or think of the person who prides themselves on being logical, successful, emotionally controlled, until one day they break down, crying at a red light, panicking at a birthday party. That's not random. That's the unconscious erupting, because it's been ignored for too long. This isn't about pathologizing everything. It's about realizing that the unconscious is part of your intelligence, part of your soul. It's not here to hurt you, it's here to complete you. When you partner with the unconscious, you begin to heal patterns you didn't even know were driving your life. So, what do these 6 dangers have in common? They're all invisible forces, quiet, subtle, embedded in your psyche. They don't show up as monsters, they show up as patterns, as habits, as identities you mistake for truth. And that's what makes them dangerous. The persona, the projections, the spiritual ego, the disowned feminine or masculine, the resistance to your real self, the forgotten unconscious. These aren't just concepts, they're experiences. They shape your relationships, your emotions, your sense of self, whether you're aware of them or not. But here's the truth. Awareness is liberation. Carl Jung didn't want you to be perfect. He wanted you to be whole. And wholeness comes from seeing what you've been avoiding, from welcoming what you've pushed away, from realizing that your growth isn't about becoming better, it's about becoming more you. Each of these 6 dangers is also an invitation to wake up, to listen, to feel, to integrate, to take back your power from the unconscious forces that have shaped you and begin living consciously. You don't have to fix everything overnight. This isn't about speed. It's about depth. So take your time, revisit this video, reflect, journal, talk to someone. Let these insights land not just in your mind, but in your choices. And if this journey spoke to you, if it made you feel seen, challenged, or inspired, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. This channel exists to explore the depths, to honor your inner world, and to help you walk the path that leads not to perfection, but to authenticity. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more real ones. And that starts with you. And remember, your journey is valid even when it's messy, even when it's slow, even when no one else understands it. Jung said,